Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my wrap up of all of the books that I've read over the last few months. So I have quite a range of different books to talk to you about today, so I'm very excited to get stuck in and to talk to you about my thoughts and feelings about them all. I will leave timestamps down below for you, so if you do want to jump ahead and hear me talking about a specific book, please do feel free to go ahead and do that. But without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in and talk to you about the first book that I read, which is Authority by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is, of course, the second book in the Southern Reach trilogy, which is a sci-fi horror series that I've been really enjoying. And if you haven't heard of this series before, the first book follows a group of researchers that are going into Area X, which is this area of land that's been cut off from the rest of the world by invisible borders that appear out of nowhere. And inside these invisible borders, the land is changing and evolving rapidly, and there's no sign of human life in there. There's no microplastics or anything like that, and nobody really knows what's going on with Area X. It's all a bit of a mystery. And in the first book, we're following the biologist who is joining a research team. They found a way into Area X and they're going in to document their discoveries, really. And we see through her perspective what she finds, what she experiences, and it is honestly wild and such an entertaining read. In this second book, we're following a man called John Rodriguez, who is the new director of the Southern Reach facility, which is a government facility that is in charge of studying Area X. And he is going into this facility to try and figure out why the research team is no closer to understanding the mysteries of Area X, even though they've been researching it for 30 years. So he comes in with a fresh pair of eyes and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he's met with quite a lot of hostility because, of course, within the Southern Reach, there are a lot of researchers that have dedicated their career to studying Area X. They've been looking at it and studying it and trying to figure it out for 30 years. And then suddenly you have this new person showing up and asking questions and, it's not great. So he's met with quite a lot of hostility and he's trying to navigate this situation really. And we watch as he discovers a little bit more about the research facility, the people that work there, and also a little bit more about Area X and the things that they have sort of documented and discovered. And he's trying to wrap his head around everything and come to terms with a lot of information that doesn't really make sense. And he's sort of becoming more and more sort of paranoid. He's really struggling with his new position as a director. And we watch as he discovers that there is something that's a little bit off with the people that work within the Southern Reach facility and with the building itself. And that's all I want to say because I don't want to go into any spoilers. But this obviously feels very different to the first book because it is much more confined. So in the first book, obviously we're going out into Area X and we're exploring this new kind of jungle-like environment. And the focus, I think, is very much on the setting and the discoveries that they're making and the weird sort of plant life and everything that they discover and the animals. Whereas in this book, it all takes place within this government facility. So the entire book takes place in one building. So it's much more confined and it's also, I would say, a more subtle horror. So it's more this kind of growing sense of uneasiness. And what I really enjoy about Jeff Vandermeer's writing is how he makes the mundane feel scary. So the way that he describes things like the office rooms, the fluorescent lighting, the carpets, the smell of the disinfectant that they use to clean the facility, all of these fairly mundane things, the way that he describes them makes it feel unsettling and like something isn't quite right. And you get this sense that, this place and these people are being kind of changed and kind of maybe corrupted somehow. I would also say that this second book, the focus is much more on the main character. It's kind of like a character study, really. You're really focusing in on him and getting to know him on an intimate level. And, he's not necessarily a particularly likable guy. Sometimes he is a bit of a jerk, but he's also really vulnerable at times. And you kind of really get to know him intimately through his thoughts and his feelings. And you're with him as he is kind of getting more and more paranoid and being influenced and things. And so, yeah, it's a real look at the person. Whereas in the first book, it's more about the external environment. This it feels like it's much more about the internal environment of the person, if that makes sense. Yeah, I would say this is a much more subtle horror. Don't get me wrong, there are some great scenes in here that have that Jeff Vandermeer style bizarre horror sort of quality to them, but it is slower paced. We are just in this government building, and so it feels very different. And I think for that reason, some people don't necessarily get on with this second book as much as the first one. I definitely enjoyed the first one more than this one, but I did appreciate what this second book did, and I'm glad that I read it. I will also say that you can read the first book as a standalone. It kind of works as its own story, but you really need to have read the first book before reading this second book, because otherwise you won't understand everything that's going on, because it does make reference to, you know, the stuff that happened in the first book. So this is very much a continuation of the story. So yeah, that's my very rambly thoughts and feelings about this second book. Overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to getting to the third book. The next book that I read was Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. I gave in to the hype with this one. It feels like everybody and their mother has been talking about this book series, and I felt like I was missing out. So I wanted to jump in and see what everybody was ranting and raving about. And I was looking for a fun audiobook as well, because my husband and I were going on a long drive together, and I wanted to put something on that I thought we would both enjoy, and something that would just be a little bit fun and easy to listen to on the drive. And I feel like this book really hit the mark for that. Do I think it's worth all of the hype that it's been getting? I'm not sure. I definitely didn't love it as much as everybody else seems to, but I still, you know, I had a fun time with it for what it is, but I'm not quite sure why it's so crazy and so popular. I understand it's an enjoyable, fun time, but it wasn't groundbreaking for me personally. But like I say, it was still a silly good time. If somehow you haven't heard of this series before, this is a fantasy series and it's a lit RPG. So it's written like it is a literary role-playing game. And the main character is Carl. And it starts off with him going outside to rescue his ex-girlfriend's cat, because the cat jumps out the window in the middle of the night. So he goes out to rescue her. And when he's outside, suddenly all of the buildings in the entire world collapse. So anyone who's indoors is instantly killed. And suddenly this voice appears from the ether and says that everybody who's left has two choices. They can either try and survive on the surface of the earth, even though there's now no shelter or anything, or they can go down into the dungeon and be a part of this game, this kind of game show where you have to it's a dungeon crawler game, so you have to kind of work your way through the different dungeon levels and try and survive. And it's basically a TV show that's being broadcast by aliens. So it has that Hunger Games quality to it as well, where, you know, the players who enter into this game not only have to try and survive, but they also have to try and win the favour of the viewers, because that means that they're more likely to get better loot and to get sponsors and things like that. So yeah, of course, Carl and his cat, Princess Donut, decide to go down into the dungeons and join in with this game. And we're basically following them as they are going through the different levels of the dungeon. And there's lots of loot, there's lots of levelling up, there's lots of different weapons and items, and it's very silly. It is very silly. You have to suspend your disbelief a lot with this one, but it's also pretty humorous. I will say that a lot of the humor is quite dude bro humor, which doesn't really work for me all the time. I find it a little bit maybe a little bit immature at times, but there were also some moments that really caught me off guard and did make me chuckle in this book too. So it's definitely a fun time. And this series knows its target audience. It is definitely for you if you enjoy lit RPG, if you like things like Dungeons and Dragons, because there's loads of references to those kinds of things. There's stats and things like that. And, you know, it's funny. It's a fun time. I enjoyed the character of Princess Donut, who is the cat, and she ends up being actually a really valuable player in the game. She has super high charisma, which is quite funny, and I love the back and forth between her and Carl. They really complement each other, and also kind of they have this banter between each other, which is really funny. So Yeah, I enjoyed it for what it was, but I'm not racing to pick up the second book, which is where I feel like I'm different to other people. I feel like a lot of people read this one and were like, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed, I need to go and read the whole series. Whereas I'm kind of like, yeah, I've read it, I get it, but I'm kind of done with that. Because even through reading this first book, I was starting to feel like it was a bit repetitive. It was just kind of, what's going to be on the next level? What's going to be the next big boss fight? It felt kind of like we weren't having anything more than that. So yeah, I kind of feel like I enjoyed it for what it was, but I'm not super compelled to carry on reading it unless I'm in the specific mood for that type of humor, in which case I probably will pick up the next book. I will say though that the audiobook for this is really great. The narrator does a fantastic job. He puts on this really over the top voice, especially for the AI, which is really funny. And he also narrates the main character in a voice that sounds like Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove, which just really tickled me because I really love The Emperor's New Groove. I love Kronk as a character, and I was basically just imagining him going through the dungeon, which just made it even more entertaining for me. So I would definitely recommend the audiobook if you're looking for a fun, fast-paced, silly, funny romp. The next book that I read was The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. So this is of course the second book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I did actually film a dedicated reading vlog for this book, so I will link that down below for you if you're interested. I'd recommend heading over there if you want to hear my full thoughts and feelings, but I will try and keep this quite brief considering I've already done a separate vlog for this. But this is of course the second book in the classic fantasy trilogy, and it's split into two sections. So the first section follows Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, who are on the trail of Merry and Pippin, who have been captured by orcs, and then the second half follows Frodo and Sam as they're travelling towards Mordor. So yeah, I think the highlights for me in this book were the Ents. So we finally got to see the Ents, which are of course these big tree people. So I really enjoyed meeting them and being on the road with them and Merry and Pippin. And I also just really enjoyed some of the locations that we got to visit in this second book, because we saw some fantastic settings. We get to see a little bit of Rohan, we see Fangorn Forest with the Ents, and we also get to see this beautiful elven city called Lothlorien, I think it is. And so we get some really beautiful descriptions of these really awesome settings. So I really loved that and thought that built a lot of atmosphere within this book. I also really enjoyed seeing Frodo and Sam's friendship grow even closer in this book as they're on this perilous journey, and they're just such an iconic duo, and I loved all of the scenes with those two together, and also the back and forth banter a little bit with Gollum too. And I also liked the back and forth banter between Gimli and Legolas and seeing their friendship start to blossom a bit more in this book too. So yeah, those were the highlights for me. Some criticisms I would say are that it tends to go quite quickly, which is a bit of an unpopular opinion. I feel like a lot of people say that the Lord of the Rings books are really slow, but I feel like it could be slower. Like, I don't know if that's because I've read a lot of really chunky fantasy books now, and that's kind of what I've come to expect, sort of taking a little bit more time with things. And so when I get to Lord of the Rings, it does feel like it's quite pacey. They're cramming a lot into a relatively small book. In particular, I was shocked by the battle at Helm's Deep, because that is over in literally one chapter, and it's a pretty short chapter as well. And I was just really surprised by that, because obviously that dominates a large part of the movie, and I am a big fan of the movies, and it's such an epic battle scene in the film, and so I was kind of anticipating it in the book, and then when we got to it, it was over in a flash, and I was like, is that it? So I do think that battles and action isn't Tolkien's strong point. What he excels at is the environment, the setting, the language play, the poems, and the overall kind of atmosphere and all the history and mythology behind his stories. I feel like that's where he excels at. But when it comes to the actual action in his stories, I feel like that's where he falls short a little bit. But all in all, I enjoyed the second book. I'm just a huge fan of the movies in general and the story. It's such a classic, isn't it? And I can't wait to go into the third and final book. Next up, we have Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. So this is another one where I saw everybody talking about it, and I wanted to join in on the conversation, and I wanted to see what all the buzz was about. So I gave in and I decided to listen to this one on audio. I was looking for something to listen to in the car because I was having to do quite a lot of driving over the last few months. So I decided to pick this one up on Audible, and I did end up enjoying it. I will say that I am of the era of Hunger Games. So I was a teen when the original trilogy books were being published and released. So I read them during that stage in my life, and I really enjoyed them when they came out. So reading this book felt very nostalgic to me. It made me feel like I was a teenager again, and it just gave me all of those vibes that I remember. I'm not sure that I would enjoy this one as much if I hadn't have read the original trilogy when I was younger, but because I already have that attachment to the Hunger Games series, I did enjoy this one because it just brought me right back to those times and made me feel like I was young again, I suppose you could say. So obviously the Hunger Games is a big franchise, so I'm sure you've probably heard of it before, but if not, the Hunger Games takes place in a place called Panem, which is divided into the capital where all the wealth is, and then there's 13 districts that are of varying levels of poverty. And basically once a year, 2 people from each of the districts has to be entered into this game, this Hunger Game. And it's basically a fight for survival. So these kids get put into this big arena and they're forced to fight each other until there is one survivor who becomes the champion. And it's basically a way for the capital and the wealthy to keep the districts in check and to keep in power, basically. And so it's brutal, it's a dystopian setting, and in this story we're actually following Haymitch, who is a character that we do see in the original trilogy, so it's actually a prequel. So this is when Haymitch is a teen and when he is entered into the Hunger Games himself. So we're following his journey, and we know from the original trilogy that Haymitch, you know, had a difficult time. When we meet him in the Hunger Games series, he is an alcoholic, he's pretty, you know, depressed, he's in a bad way. So we know that it isn't going to end happily for Haymitch. So I think for that reason I went in, you know, knowing that this was going to be a bit of a tragedy, and so I was prepared for it. And yeah, it had everything that I was expecting. It had the angst, it had the tragedy, it had, you know, the training before they go into the arena. We have the actual Hunger Games itself and the survival elements. We have Haymitch having to form, you know, alliances with other people who are going into the games to try and form a strategy. And, you know, within the games itself, we had all of those things that we expect, you know, all of the deadly twists and turns, and there's some, you know, brutal fights and things like that. So it had everything that I was expecting in it, and it took me right back to when I was a teenager and reading the original trilogy. I will say that I wasn't as emotionally impacted by this book as everybody else seems to have been, but I think that's because, well, partly because I listen to it on audio and I tend not to take things in quite as much when I'm listening on audio, but also because I went into it knowing that it was going to end in tragedy. We know what the Hunger Games are like from reading the first trilogy. We know how Haymitch ends up, and so I was prepared. And for that reason, I didn't let myself become too emotionally attached to any of the characters because I just knew that it wasn't going to end well. So I think for that reason, I wasn't particularly moved as much as everybody else was. I recognized that there were obviously some really sad moments and heartbreaking moments, but I wasn't like moved to tears or anything like that. I was expecting it, I was prepared for it. And yeah, I will say though that the way some of the characters died and things in the Hunger Games was quite shocking and did take me by surprise. So that was entertaining. But yeah, all in all, I had a fun time with this book. Like I say, it was very nostalgic for me. Not sure I would necessarily enjoy it if I hadn't already have been a fan of the original trilogy, but yeah, I had fun. The next book that I read was a chunky one, and that was Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erikson. So this, of course, is the chunky second installment in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which is a really big epic fantasy series that I've been getting into this year. I read the first book, Gardens of the Moon, in January, and so I've been slowly sort of working my way through. And let me tell you, this book took me months to finish because it is about 1,000 pages long and it's intense. That is definitely the first thing that I want to say about this story, is that it's a 1,000-page book on war and it is dark with a capital D. This is super dark. It is really, really intense. And so for that reason, I definitely wouldn't recommend it for everybody. There are some truly horrific scenes in here. It's all on the page. Stephen Erikson doesn't shy away from showing us the absolute atrocity and brutality of war. So please, please be careful if you're thinking about going into this series and into this book in particular. Do check out trigger warnings and things if you need to. But yeah, this book is going to be hard for me to talk about without going into spoilers. So for that reason, I am going to be filming a dedicated spoiler-filled review for this book. So if you're interested to hear my full thoughts and feelings, do keep an eye out for that on my channel. I'm hoping to film it fairly soon while everything is still fresh in my mind. But talking about it without spoilers, what can I tell you? So this is obviously the second book in the Malazan series. So the Malazan series is a series that is set during a time of war and conquest. So we're following the Malazan Empire that is trying to expand its territories. And in this second book, we are in a completely different location to the first book. So in this book, we are in a continent known as the Seven Cities. And in this continent, there is this huge rebellion that is brewing that is known as the Whirlwind. And it's being led by this seer called Shaikh. So that's kind of the backdrop to this story, really. And we're following 4 different sort of groups of people. So the first is Duiker, I never know how to pronounce his name, but he is a historian and he is basically witnessing firsthand the atrocities of this rebellion that is happening in the Seven Cities continent. And he is traveling alongside Tolkein, who is a Malazan leader. And Tolkein has been tasked with transporting this huge number of Malazan refugees across the desert to the city of Arryn for their protection. So Duiker is accompanying him and he's sort of witnessing what happens on this perilous journey across the 7 cities. We then follow 3 prisoners who are placed in this mine, and we're following them as they're trying to survive and possibly thinking about trying to escape from this mine. We follow 2 new characters, Mappo and Akarium, and they're quite interesting. They're traveling across the desert seeking answers. So Akarium has lost his memories and he's trying to find out why and to get to the bottom of what's going on, I guess. And Mappo is his friend and traveling companion and he's going along with him. And we find out through the course of the book that Mappo has his own secrets and his own reason for traveling with Akarium. And then finally, we have a bunch of characters from the first book who are traveling across the desert for spoilery reasons. So I can't really talk to you too much about their journey in this book. But those are kind of the 4 different groups of people that we're following within this story. But I think the absolute standout thing for me in this book is the atmosphere and the setting, because it is so dark, it is so bleak, and it's so different from the first book as well, because the 7 Cities is kind of like this desert continent. So there's lots of sand and, you know, the heat, the high temperatures, the lack of water, the survival elements, and the insects as well. Insects are a big deal in this book. There are so many swarms of flies and these horrible blood flies everywhere, which kind of symbolize sort of death and decay, don't they? But there's also these cape moths and butterflies, and I feel like they kind of symbolize transformation, which is a big theme within this book. So the actual setting itself is so gritty and it's so atmospheric and it's so dark, and it really, really fits the vibe and the themes of this story. So I absolutely loved the setting of this book. I thought it was absolutely perfect for a backdrop for this war story. And, you know, yes, it is a 1,000-page book on war, but there are some lighter moments. There are some funny moments, particularly with Mappo and Akarium's story. They end up meeting this priest called Pust, who is quite a funny character. So there is a little bit of humour thrown in there, but it is pretty gritty and intense. So like I say, please be warned going into this one. It did take me several months to get through this because it is quite dark. Quite is an understatement. It is hugely dark, and there are some really disturbing and horrific scenes in here that will stick with me for life. So yeah, this is definitely a story that has just like imprinted itself into my brain. Like I won't stop thinking about some of these scenes forever. It is wild. There's some really interesting magic in this series and a lot of confusion as well. I do think this second book is a little bit easier to follow than the first book, which feels like it is very much all over the place. You're jumping around here, there, and everywhere. Whereas in the second book, it's a little bit clearer to see where our characters are going and what the sort of purpose is for each character and what they're doing and where they're going. So I found it easier to follow in that sense. But there is still a lot of things that I don't know about this world. There's still things that I'm trying to wrap my head around. And I think that's probably because a lot of information is still hidden from me. So Stephen Erikson, definitely doesn't give you all the information up front. He just drops you straight into this world and you have to just kind of run with it. And so there is a lot that I still don't understand about the history and the magic and things like that. And it is becoming a little bit clearer as I read through these books, but there's still so much mystery, so much that I don't fully understand yet. And I can definitely understand why people say that this is better on a reread, because I can just tell there's so many moments in here that I feel like I should understand, or with more context would be more impactful to me. But because I don't have all the information yet, I can't fully appreciate it. So it is a little bit frustrating in that sense, but I am very intrigued by this series and I will be slowly carrying on with this one, although they are very long and very intense. So I do plan on sort of pacing them out quite a lot. But yeah, I feel very accomplished to have read this massive book with tiny writing. And I'm glad that I did, because it's not like anything that I've read before. Yeah, that's all I can really say without spoilers. Okay, and the final book is completely different from Deadhouse Gates. So I was craving something that would be much lighter, that would demand much less of my attention, and something that would just be fun. So I decided to pick up The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. And yeah, this is one of the books in the Dream Harbour series, I think it's called, which is a contemporary romance series, which is very different for me. But I was actually gifted these books a while ago, and I mean, the covers are so cute, but I feel like don't be fooled by the artwork on the cover here, because it is so different to the actual vibe of the book. The cover screams cozy autumn. There's literally maple leaves and, orange like autumn leaves blowing in the wind on the front cover, which just makes no sense because this is a summer romance. It's set in the peak of summer and, at the beach. So completely different to the cover. So I don't know why they made that choice. It makes no sense for the story. But yeah, this is very much a spicy summer romance, and capital S on the spice, because this is basically 90% erotica at this point. It is a lot of sex scenes, a lot of smut and steam in this story. So yeah, please be warned of that before you go into this one. And what can I say about this? I mean, it was fine. It was fluff. I inhaled it in about one sitting. Super easy to read, but the plot makes zero sense. And it's very surface level. So yeah, what can I say about this? It follows our main character Hazel, who works in a bookstore, and one day she finds that one of the books has been defaced and someone has highlighted a couple of lines in the book, and she decides that this must be a clue that she needs to follow. And she's kind of going through this quarter-life crisis, really. She's approaching her 30th birthday and she feels like she's lived a very safe life, and she feels like she needs to take more risks before her big 30th birthday. So she decides to have this summer of fun and this summer of following these clues in these books, and she enlists the help of this hunky fisherman called Noah, and the two of them basically enter into this relationship where they decide that they just want to have a summer of fun. So it's very light-hearted, but of course the two of them end up catching feelings, which complicates things, and that's basically the story. It's basically two adults who are not having a conversation together. Yeah, it was, what can I say? I don't want to be too negative, but it wasn't really for me. It was just pure spice, really. There wasn't much to the characters that's particularly memorable, in my opinion, and it was basically just sex scenes in different summery locations. So on the beach, in a boat, those kinds of things. So if you're looking for pure fluff, if you're looking for spicy, fluffy, you don't have to think too hard about it, romance maybe to read at the beach, then this might be for you. But yeah, it really is very, very surface level, and like I say, the plot doesn't really make sense, and it's essentially just erotica at this point. So please don't be fooled by the cute cozy cover, because that's not what you get on the inside. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and feelings about all of these books. Let me know if you've read any of these books before, and if you enjoyed them, or if you didn't enjoy them. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? Either way, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. I hope you're all doing very, very well. I'm sending you all lots of love. As always, don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me. I will be filming that dedicated video for Deadhouse Gates, so keep your eyes peeled for that on my channel if you're interested. And yeah, thank you so much, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!